The train was there with no warning. I still can't believe I didn't hear it. But then, in peacetime, I could never understand how people got killed on railway crossings. Like, how could you not hear a train? Well, at least now I knew the answer to that. I guess I was concentrating too hard on the job at hand. Dad would have been pleased with me. He was always saying I didn't concentrate enough. Anyway, I just stepped back from lighting the fuse when I felt a push of cold air against me and realized a millisecond later that it was the train. Only then did I hear it. It still didn't have any lights. I sprang back, grabbing my pack, then did a sort of half-turn and a dive down the bank. It wasn't graceful, but it got me clear of the engine. I deliberately kept rolling till the ground leveled out and I couldn't roll any further. I got up to run, but at that moment the bomb went off. God, the fuse had burned fast. Maybe the rush of air from the train caused it to go faster. I really don't know. So just as I was getting up, I was bowled over again. Bowled over and blown away. By now I should have been used to the power of an explosion. I'd been in enough. But nothing can get you used to them. They're such a shock to the body, the mind, the place where you have your emotions. It's like you've been chucked into a coffee grinder and someone's turned it on at full speed. You lose all control over everything. Jump down, spin around, pick a bell of cotton. That's a line from a song. You're like an epileptic cotton picker. You've been wired with electrodes and your limbs go into a dance you didn't choreograph. It's horrible. The only good thing about it is that it doesn't last very long. I ended up on my back in a dump of bark and leaf litter. My bones loose in my body, my skin stretched and sore. I didn't know where my pack was. I just knew that I didn't have it anymore. But at least I got a good view of the anarchy above. Bits of bark and branches were flying in all directions. Behind them were lines of white smoke. No patterns to them, just going where they felt like. I saw a thick, huge white cloud billowing up in the center of the wreck. Then it started rolling, very fast towards me. Suddenly I was in a fog and couldn't make out anything anymore. It gave me the kick up the backside I needed. Before the fog, I'd seen enough to know that the engine and the first couple of carriages had gone over the bomb before it blew up, so the people in them were probably okay. But they'd be madder than a staff room on a Year 12 muck-up day. They'd be swarming after me with every weapon they could find. I started groping through the fog. While I'd been lying on the leaf litter, I thought the fog was ideal. I could make my escape in safety. But now I realized it wasn't such a bonus after all. I had to go too slowly, and the so-called fog was already lifting. Within a couple of minutes, it cleared as quickly as it arrived, and I was still within 100 meters of the train wreck. I heard yells from behind, and I didn't need an interpreter to know what they meant. "There she is!" was the general drift. The bush was straight ahead, and I'd never been more glad to see it. I bolted into the tree line like a rosella in a wheat crop. I felt a big attraction to the smell of eucalyptus at that moment. As I started down a slope, which I knew would take me out of sight of the train, I risked one glance behind. I got the shock of my life. What looked like a squad of soldiers had fanned out across the top of the hill, and in the light of the burning trucks I could see that they were armed to the teeth. A couple of them were in the act of kneeling. They obviously thought that they could get a good shot at me before I scurried into the deeper bush. Unfortunately, by looking back, I'd lost my momentum. I'd like to have accelerated down the slope, maybe diving through the bracken to throw them off their aim, but I wasn't going fast enough. All I could do was swerve and try to get up more speed at the same time. So I swerved to the left and came almost immediately to a bank I hadn't seen in the darkness. I plunged down, thinking, well, at least I'll be out of their sight for a little bit now. I was overconfident about that. I ran another 6 paces before I was shot. It was a feeling I'll never forget. If it was some other pain, I guess I would have got over it. At first it wasn't even the worst pain I've had in my life. In some ways, being winded was worse. But one difference was that soon you start getting better when you're winded. With this, I soon started getting worse. Another difference was the psychological one. When you know you've been shot, it hurts all over. For a moment, I actually thought it was a snake bite. I know you don't expect to be bitten by a snake at night, although I'm sure it's very possible. I've seen quite a few snakes out at night when it's hot enough, once even on our veranda at home. This wasn't such a hot night, but I still thought it was a snake bite. There was a terrible stabbing pain in my left calf, like a red-hot 3-inch nail had been driven in there. Right away, a burning feeling spread up my leg, like a hot coal was lodged inside. I looked around frantically, expecting for a moment to see a quick swerve through the grass as a tiger or a brownie took off in a hurry, but it was too dark and I didn't see anything. I hopped along on one leg for about 6 paces. Then the pain virtually went again. I mean, sure there was still an ache, but nothing worth writing home about. I put my foot back down, ran 3 or 4 more steps, then bang, the leg went from under me. This time it really hurt. Jeez, did it hurt. I knew then that this was no snake bite, that I had been shot. The whole leg was screaming at me. It had no strength at all. It was a mass of pain from the toes to way up my thigh, virtually to my waist. It didn't strike me at the time, but I'd been shot in pretty much the same place as Lee, my left calf. I opened my mouth to scream, then realized I couldn't do that, and it was a waste of time anyway. Not only was there no one to come to my rescue, to offer sympathy and Band-Aids and Panadeine, but a few dozen soldiers were chasing me at full speed with rifles blazing. If there'd been time to think, I'd have to acknowledge that they were good shots too. One of them was anyway, or incredibly lucky. I put my hand to my leg, as if holding it would ease the pain, but it didn't help at all. And when I took my hand away again, I realized it was sticky with blood. My blood. I started to feel funny all over. Shock, I guess. I was dragging myself along, not at much speed, but trembling and shaking, and just feeling totally weird, like I wanted to faint and throw up and go to sleep all at the same time. What I did instead was crawl another 20 meters towards a big patch of bracken. 20 meters. That was the longest journey of my life. I knew I was making little whimpering noises, like a tired baby. And it's funny, but I distinctly remember having a vision of my mother at that moment. I felt a sudden intense desire to be a baby again, to be held safe against her, to rest in her arms, to feel the heat of her body, and to breathe in her warm smell. The last 6 or 8 meters I did a centimeter at a time. I heard, or thought I heard, the voices of the soldiers following me, looking for me. I heard both men and women, but I don't know if I really heard them or if I imagined it. There was another volley of shots, and I know I didn't imagine that. Bullets ripped through some leaves quite near me. Branches snapped and fell slowly from limb to limb of the trees until they thumped to the ground. The bush was taking a pounding tonight. I thought, one of those bullets hit me. One of those bullets that are so powerful they can break big branches. What has it done to my leg? I started shaking again and was afraid to look down at the wound, afraid of the damage I might see. Gradually, though, I felt calmer. I seemed to stop shaking and drift away, like a dream where I was awake and could see myself having the dream, almost like there were 2 of me. Then it got weirder, and I saw myself lying in the bracken, as though I was in the high branches of a tree and looking down. I saw the top of my own head. Although it was a cold night, I felt surprisingly warm. I prickled all over, like I'd been injected with something radioactive. I had pins and needles, but they were hot needles. I couldn't hear anything. Maybe I'd been identifying too closely with Gavin. But a huge cotton wool muffler had been placed over the world, and there were no sounds anymore. I don't know how long that lasted, but as I lay in the bracken, buried under its fronds, a strong voice from somewhere inside started making itself heard, and it said, "Come on, fight back, be strong." "Don't disturb me," I begged. "Don't wake me. I'm feeling quite nice now, quite comfortable. Let me stay like this." But it wouldn't be silenced. It got louder and louder, and more demanding, and even though I got cross with it, suddenly the fog in my mind cleared, and I could see and hear everything clearly again. And I could feel everything again. That was the bad news. My leg was agony from top to bottom. If I could have torn it off and thrown it away, I would have done it. Burns of pain ripped through it, wave after wave after wave, with almost no pauses, no relief, no chance to draw another breath and get my mind ready for the next hit. Such a tiny thing, a little lead bullet, to do so much damage. Just a couple of centimeters long. I vowed I'd never shoot another living creature again. I was shocked to think that I'd put animals through this torture. Then my mind cleared even further, and I remembered all the people I'd shot during this war. I decided not to think about that anymore. Even through the pain, even as I clasped my leg and sweated and sobbed, I could hear the soldiers. The voices were getting closer all the time. They were calling to each other continuously. I think so they didn't get out of line, keeping themselves organized, but maybe also to intimidate their target, me. Well, that worked all right. I was intimidated. They sounded so professional, so disciplined, that I couldn't think of anything to do against them. They sounded so strong that they made me feel weak. About the only thing I could do was stop myself groaning. That was quite an achievement. I bit my bottom lip so hard my teeth nearly went through it. I pushed the heel of my right leg deep into the soft earth. I arched my back and twisted my head from side to side, all the time keeping the tight grip on my left leg. The only distraction I had from the pain was when a pair of boots crunched past my face. He or she, whoever it was, had a torch, so I was at risk of being trodden on or seen or both. But neither happened. The boots strode on, less than a metre from me. But for that couple of seconds I stopped thinking so much about my leg. As soon as the soldier disappeared down into the gully, a new blaze of pain ran through me, going higher now, up my side into my armpit. The next time the pain ebbed, it was such a relief that I lay back gasping. I dared to hope that it might stay like that. Oh, if only it would. I didn't make the slightest move in case I set it off again. But I did start to think, how am I going to get out of this? I wanted to respond to the voice in my head I'd heard, or imagined I'd heard, earlier. But the way I was going, just staying alive might be more than I could manage. I might bleed to death here, in among the bracken. I knew I was bleeding, but I didn't know how much. Finally, reluctantly, I ran my hand down my leg and patted around on the ground. It felt pretty dry. That was lucky. But it didn't mean I wouldn't die. I remembered the feeling of calm and peace that had stolen over me just a few minutes before. I shuddered. Suddenly that feeling didn't seem so peaceful after all. I realized it might have been death, stealing around me with its peaceful fingers. I didn't want that kind of peace, thank you very much. I wasn't ready for it. Judging from the noise, there were soldiers everywhere. If they stayed around, I had no chance. With a bullet in my leg and the sun coming up, I'd be as easy a target as a scarecrow in a paddock. Experimentally, I slid a metre to my right, towards the edge of the bracken patch. Right away the pain came back, so violently that this time I did cry out. I could still hear the soldiers. Funny, considering how long it had been since the boots trampled past. I thought they might have been well gone by now. As I lay listening, it struck me that they weren't getting any further away. In fact, they seemed to have stopped. I didn't know what that meant, but there was every chance it was bad news for me. Then, things did get worse. The search party started coming back up the slope. My leg now felt like someone was cutting it open with a blunt chisel, heated red hot. I hated being so helpless. I knew I had to move, but I didn't know if I could. I tried another experiment, going in the opposite direction, but that was even worse, as it meant I was trying to roll over on the wounded leg. I thought grimly, well, at least it's the same leg as my bad knee. If they cut it off, I'll have solved two problems at once. The way the soldiers were now casting around not far from me, I was pretty sure they knew I was close by. I wished so much I still had my pack and that it was full of Ryan's explosives, or that I had a weapon of any kind. I bet they knew I wasn't armed, that had too good a view of me, even in the dark, as I raced away down the slope. If I'd had a weapon, they wouldn't be this confident, searching the bush at night. I began to realize that this time I really had no chance. Daylight couldn't be far away, and if they hadn't found me by then, it wouldn't take them long once the sun came up. The drops of blood would be a dead giveaway. Dead, in every sense of the word. For a while the soldiers were fairly quiet again. I'm not sure how much time passed. I think I might have drifted into a bit of a blear. The next time I registered anything was when I heard the bark of a dog. It gave me such a shock. Not at first, though. At first I heard it while I was in a dream. Somehow I was back home, before the war, with Dad giving me a lecture, again. One of his favourite sayings was, "The gate's always open, the bull's always angry, and the rifle's always loaded." He was telling me that again because I hadn't checked the cows every day, assuming that because they'd been all right on the days I did check, they'd be all right on the days I didn't. Mum had actually told me she thought this cow might be calving. I can even remember her number, 132, but I never noticed her in a dip in the long grass of One Tree Paddock, and we'd had such a good run with calving that I'd become overconfident. When we did find her, we were about a week too late. The calf had been dead a long time. I'd say the cow had been in labour a full week. We started pulling the calf out from the cow, but it was rotten and it disintegrated. Meanwhile, the cow was burping and farting, totally noxious gases. Dad and I were both dry retching. The smells were overpowering, as if the sight wasn't bad enough. We got the legs of the calf out, one by one. Then Dad got a chain around its head, but when we started pulling on the chain, we pulled its head off. We got most of the bits out eventually, but, surprise, surprise, the cow died of shock about a minute after we'd finished. That's when Dad gave me the lecture, as if I didn't feel guilty enough. I mean, it wasn't really because I hadn't checked the cows every day. She was in such a deep hole in the corner of the paddock that I must have missed her at least 3 times. But I guess I could have checked more carefully. Maybe it wasn't so surprising that I'd dream about that, as I lay there with my leg feeling it had been shattered and shredded by the bullet, and me knowing that it was because I hadn't kept a good enough lookout. The gate's always open, the bull's always angry, and the rifle's always loaded. Yeah, and I could add to that. The train's always loaded with soldiers, and they're always armed and dangerous. And if you hang around for long enough, they bring dogs. I heard the first few barks while I was still in my little dream, and thought it was Millie, our old dog. Then suddenly I was wide awake. The sun was shining hard into my eyes, and the barking was very close. It was sharp, aggressive, and loud. A few moments later there was a volley of shots, smashing into the earth and the vegetation 3 or 4 meters from me. They'd started there anyway, then they'd moved away. I saw the grass and bracken being blown backwards and forwards, as though a great wind was rushing through the undergrowth. I could see what was happening, and what I couldn't see I worked out. When the dogs got excited, the soldiers started firing. Why not? Saved a lot of mucking around. Less time and less danger. Let the rifle do the work for you, instead of having to rake through the bushes looking for a dangerous terrorist with your bare hands. The taxpayers paid for the ammo anyway. The firing stopped, and there was a bit of silence. Then I heard voices again, men calling to each other, and then, unmistakably, encouraging to the dogs to have another go. The barking started, only it quickly became an excited yapping. I could hear them coming straight towards me. It was time for me to give up. I might only extend my life by a few moments, but when it comes to the end, even a few moments seem precious. "All right, keep your shirts on," I called. I tried to get up, but it was hard, with my leg in raw pain. I couldn't put any weight on it, not when the slightest movement had me gasping with shock. But I levered myself up on my right knee, enough for them to see me, and for me to see them. There were 6 lounging around in the background, leaning against trees, smoking, just hanging out. They sure were confident. Then there were 4 doing the actual business of searching. 2 had dogs on leashes, and each had a soldier with him. These soldiers seemed like the hatchet men, because they had automatic rifles at the ready, and they looked ready themselves. I got very cautious when I saw them, raising my hands slowly and deliberately, staring them down in case they felt like testing their aim on me. The dogs were cute. I wish I could have patted them and played with them and scratched their stomachs like in the old days. They were beagles, both quite young and very pretty. Lovely alert heads and shining eyes. They looked pleased with themselves, and of course they had every right. They'd caught the vicious enemy gorilla, caught her without a fight. It wasn't a very dignified surrender. I tried to stand on my one good leg, but I lost my balance. I guess being so tired didn't help. I fell in the bracken and just lay there, not caring very much whether they killed me on the spot. It seemed like ages before they came to get me, but it probably wasn't. A whole lot of boots suddenly surrounded me. I looked up, and there they all were, staring down at me. For the first time I noticed that the grass was quite badly blood-stained, smears of it everywhere. So I guess I'd bled more than I realized. I wasn't sure what I was expected to do. I'd only been caught once before, and the circumstances had been different. Now, 4 rifles were pointed at me, so I lay waiting for them to do whatever they wanted. I felt a strange kind of peace. Not the same as a few hours earlier, just an acceptance that this was the end of the road. I'd done everything possible. I couldn't carry out any more of Colonel Finlay and Ryan's program of sabotage. The soldiers would take their revenge. I would pay the same price I had made their friends pay. It didn't quite work out like that. They prodded me with the barrels of the rifles to make me stand. I got up slowly, awkwardly, this time being more careful not to fall over. It went okay until I was nearly upright. Then they seemed to lose patience. Maybe they thought I was being deliberately slow. One of them shouted and swung his rifle so that it hit me across the back. I kept my balance, but only just. Another one pushed at me to get moving. Then the first one swung with his rifle again. I put up a hand to block him, but as I did, someone from behind kicked me in the left leg, on the exact place where I'd been wounded. I went down like a beast with a bullet between the eyes. The only satisfaction I can claim is that I didn't make any noise. I don't know whether that was self-control or unconsciousness, because I sure saw stars. I had a blurred view of the bracken, as though someone had put heavy black glass in front of my eyes. I copped a few more boots. At first the pain was crippling, beyond anything I'd experienced, anything I could possibly bear. I curled up in a ball and protected my leg as much as I could. The blows rained down. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I cried out. Then I screamed, but it didn't lessen the pain by the slightest degree. After quite a while, the pain seemed to go away, and although I felt the thuds of their boots, it was like they were doing it to something else, to a block of wood perhaps. I heard them and felt the impact, but the pain had faded into a blur of darkness. It was weird. At some stage it stopped, but I think it was a long time before I realized why. Someone was grabbing me and lifting me by the armpits. "Don't!" I cried out like a baby. They didn't take any notice. Instead, they dragged me, heels bumping over the ground, for quite a distance. The pain came back, 10 times worse. Every bump to my left leg sent agony racing up my side, like someone had ripped my leg open with his bare hands and was now pouring kerosene into the wound. I started screaming. I wanted it to stop, and I didn't care what price I had to pay. If someone had offered me death at that moment, with a promise of no more pain, I'd have taken it. No problems, no complaints. I had no power left. If the hands had let go, I'd have dropped to the ground like an imploded building. The pain had taken over. I was drunk with it. No other part of me functioned. Then, things changed again. The hands suddenly got more gentle. Instead of dragging me along, they were holding me up. I still didn't realize what had made the difference. I don't think I realized until I was in the back of their truck. Through the haze of pain and sweat and terror, I sensed that someone was directing the whole operation. Someone was in charge. Before, it had just been a rabble. I couldn't see him, but I became aware of his voice. He sounded calm and quiet. It was a relief after the yelling and screaming of the soldiers. I couldn't understand what he was saying to them, of course, but after a minute, I suddenly heard his voice right at my ear. He was speaking English, easily and confidently, with only a faint accent. "You will be properly treated now. I have made sure of it. I will get a doctor for your leg. For now, you go to a holding area." I tried to nod to show my thanks, but I couldn't move my head. Sensing that he was moving away, desperate not to lose my chance, I croaked, "Water? What is it you want?" I tried again, but the word wouldn't come out. "What is it you want? Something to drink?" Yes, please." I think I only made meaningless sounds, but he got the drift, because a minute or two later I felt a water bottle at my lips. I couldn't get much of it into my mouth. I didn't care. The feeling of it running down my chin and onto my body was enough. The man was patient, though, and held it to my lips, pouring in little sips one by one. I was very grateful to him. My eyes seemed stuck together. I tried to open them, but then gave up and just lay there. Sensing him still near me, I had another go at speaking, and this time, thanks to the water, did a little better. "Excuse me?" "Yes? What is it now?" I wanted to ask about Homer and Lee and Fee and Kevin and Gavin. I tried to formulate a question about them, but even in my blear of pain and fear and exhaustion, I had enough instinct left to avoid talking about them to an enemy soldier. With a groan, I gave up and let my head roll away.